Hello friends and welcome back to our channel. So in today's video we will be exploring the two important topics into the Power Apps development that frequently come up into the interview, that are the using custom code with the script and extending the functionality within the plugins. So as Power Apps continue to empower the users with its low code platform, there are situations where the custom solutions are needed to meet the advanced requirement. We will cover how to extend the default capabilities of the Power Apps by incorporating the custom code and integrating the external scripts and leveraging the plugins to enhance the app functionality. So if you are preparing for the Power Apps interview or just looking to level up your development skill, this video is for you. We will walk you through some key interview questions, explain the real world scenario, and also share the best practice on using the custom code and the plugins into the Power App. So make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more Power Apps tips, and let's dive into it. So here the first question is, how can you execute the custom JavaScript code into the Power Apps to handle the complex client side logic? So here the interviewer want that if there is any complex client side logic, okay, and for that you need to implement the JavaScript. So how you will proceed for that one? So for that the answer should be Power Apps doesn't directly support the JavaScript within the app itself, but yeah, we can create the custom connector that call the external API or the Azure function where the JavaScript can be executed. The Power Apps interface would call this API and retrieve the process data. Here the question is, your organization needs to calculate the complex interest rate into the Power Apps, and the built-in Power App function are insufficient for this activity. So how would you use the custom JavaScript to handle this requirement? So in this case, I would create a custom connector or use the Power Apps web API to integrate the custom JavaScript code for the complex interest rate calculation. And the JavaScript logic would reside in the secured environment like Azure, and it can be called via an API. Next question is, a user needs data from an external service which is not supported by the default Power Apps connectors. How would you integrate it with using the custom script? So in this case, I would create a custom connector that will allow the Power Apps to interact with the external service API. And then by writing the custom script into the connector, I could handle this authentication, parse the responses, and manage the API calls efficiently. Next question is, can Power Apps integrate with external API that requires specific business logic to be executed before data submission? So for this the answer will be yes. Through custom connectors, Power Apps can integrate with the external API, and the custom connector can execute the business logic using the custom code before submitting the data to the external API. Next question is, how would you implement the custom validation rules using the code into the Power Apps that are not supported by the Power Apps built-in validation? So whatever built-in validation in the Power Apps, if that is not supporting and we need to implement some validation at our side, so what we can do? So in this case, we need to create a custom connectors that will connect the Power Apps to an external validation service, and in that validation service you need to write the complex business logic that should be handled via the as script or the code, and this service returns the validation results to the app. You need to implement form validation that checks for the specific business rule. How would you use custom code for this in Power Apps? I would use Power FX for simple validation, but in case of complex business rule, I would rely on a custom connectors that is integrated with a web service, means running the custom script, and it will validate the data and return a validation result to the Power Apps. Suppose your app requires real-time data time processing based on the user input. How can you use custom JavaScript or plugin to enable this in the Power Apps? So I would implement a custom API that will process the data into the real time using the JavaScript, and this will be hosted in the Azure function or another service. Power Apps could call this API, sending the user input and receiving the processed data to display within the app. Your app must integrate with a legacy on-premise system which uses complex logic but not supported by the Power Apps. How would custom code help here? So for that you need to create a custom connector that will communicate with the legacy system via API or the middleware that transform request and the responses. The middleware can house custom scripts that execute the complex logic required. A customer needs a conditional calculation that depend on a series of dynamic inputs. Can this be achieved using the custom code into the Power Apps? Yes, it can be achieved by using the JavaScript for the dynamic calculations, and these calculations can be offloaded to a server-side script or triggered through a custom connector. And as a result, it will return the real-time value. Describe how you can create reusable custom logic in the Power Apps with the external code. So for reusable component, you need to create the Azure function or other API that will encapsulate the custom logic, and we can call the reusable services from the multiple Power Apps application by using the custom connectors. How do you handle the real-time data updates in the Power Apps? By using the custom script. So real-time updates can be managed by external services like Signal R, and it can be called by using the custom connectors or the API, and it will allow the Power Apps to receive the real-time data as it is updated. What is the role of custom connectors into the Power Apps when using the custom code or the JavaScript? So here the custom connector act as a bridge between the Power Apps and the external service, or we can say API, where the custom code is executed. And in that API you can write the JavaScript or the server-side script. So here Power Apps will communicate with the custom connectors, and that will handle the business logic outside of the Power Apps. Can you call a REST API from Power Apps that include the custom script execution on the server side? So yeah, for that answer will be yes. By using the custom connector, Power Apps can call the REST API that will execute the server side script like JavaScript or the C# code, and it returns the result to the app. Explain how you can handle the encryption and decryption of the sensitive data into the Power Apps by using the custom code. So sensitive data can be encrypted or decrypted using the server-side script through the custom connectors, and this encryption logic would reside on a secure external service like API or the Azure function, and which is Power Apps calls when handling the sensitive data. How would you use custom script to format or process data before displaying it into the Power Apps? By using the custom connector, data can be sent to the external API, and at that API end it will be processed and formatted using the script before being returned to the Power Apps. How can custom script be used into the Power Apps to integrate with the legacy system that do not have native connectors. So for this case, custom scripts can be hosted on the middleware or APIs that interact with the legacy system. And PowerApps can call these API through the custom connectors, and it will allow the interface with the older system that don't have the direct connectors. How do you handle logging user activities into the PowerApps that go beyond the standard auditing features? So to capture the login, you need to create the custom script into the web services, and it will log the specific user actions. Like whenever user will submit the form, whenever user will do any update or delete or storing anything. Okay, so that will be stored into the external logging database, and it will be accessible for the reporting and the compliance perspective. You need to display data in a grid that update as user modify the data into the real time. How would you approach this using the custom code? So a custom web services that utilizing the signal or web sockets could handle the real-time updates. Power Apps can call this service through a custom connectors, and it will ensure that data is updated live in the app's grid view. The client wants that data encryption for sensitive information into the Power Apps. How can custom script assist in this? For this, you need to use the custom JavaScript or the .NET script on a backend service, and it will encrypt and decrypt the sensitive data. And it will also interface with the Power Apps via the custom connector that will manage the encryption through the data displayed or stored. Your organization requires API rate limiting management, which is not natively supported into the Power Apps. How do you implement? For this, we need to create the custom API service that will built in rate limiting, and Power Apps would interface with this service through a custom connectors. It will allow for the full control over the API consumption limit. The client needs to add custom behavior when a record is updated into the Power Apps. How would you extend this functionality using the plugins? So for this case, you need to create a custom plugin in the backend that will be triggered by the record update event. And the plugin will could execute the additional logic such as notifying the external system or updating the related records. Next question is, the client asks for a specific business workflow to trigger when new data is entered. How can plugin be used in Power Apps to achieve this? So plugin that listens for the create event into the database. Once it get triggered, the plugin can invoke additional workflow such as sending notification or integrating with another system. How can you use plugins to enhance error handling into the Power Apps? Plugin can intercept the error messages from the external service or database, and it apply the custom error handling logic. This might include the retry logic, logging the error, and displaying the more user-friendly message in the Power Apps. What are the Power Apps plugin and how do they differ from the custom script? So plugin in Power Apps typically refer to the external service or the component that can be integrated into an app to extend its functionality. And these are often server-side components, unlike custom script that handle the logic within the app or the API layer. How can plugin be used to trigger external workflow into the PowerApps? Plugin can trigger external workflow by integrating with the system like Power Automate or the third-party services. So when any specific event occur in the PowerApps like record creation, record updation, so in this case plugin will invoke the external workflow. Describe how would you implement a custom plugin to handle the data synchronization between the PowerApps and the another system. So a plugin can be built that listens to the data changes within the PowerApps and the communication with the external system. It can be via the API or it can be via the custom connectors. And it synchronize the data into the real time, or we can also do set a schedule for that one. Can plugins be used to add custom validation into the PowerApps? Yes. Plugin can enforce the custom validation by intercepting the data submission into the PowerApps and also applying the custom logic through an API or service before it allows the data to be saved or processed. How do plugins in the PowerApps handle the integration with third-party service like payment gateway? So, plugin can interface with a third-party service by calling their API. For example, a plugin might handle the submissions of the payment details to a payment gateway and process the response within the PowerApps. Can plugin be used to generate the reports or the documents automatically within the PowerApps? Yes. Plugin can integrate PowerApps with document generation services or the reporting engines. So when a user submits a data, the plugin can generate a report or the document and it will be returned to the PowerApps. How would you use plugin to extend PowerApps functionality for real-time collaboration features? Plugins could use services like Signal R or the WebSocket and it will be enable the real-time collaboration. So for the real-time collaboration we need to use the Signal or the WebSocket. And these plugin would handle the real-time data synchronization between the users working on the same dataset within the PowerApps. How can plugin be used into the PowerApps for enforced security or the role-based access? Plugin can validate the user role and the permission by interfacing with an external identity management system. And the plugin enforces the security rules by restricting or allowing the action based on the user role within the organization. What are the some common scenarios where plugins would be used to extend PowerApp functionality? So common scenario include like integrating with the external system, automating the workflow, real-time data synchronization, enforcing security policy, generating document, or providing advanced analytics and the reporting. Here external system means CRM or ERP. Can plugin in Power Apps be used for the data transformation before displaying it to the app? Yes. Plugin can transform the data by calling the external API and that API will apply the required business logic and that API will also do the formatting. So the transformed data is then returned to the Power Apps for the display purpose. How would you handle the version control for the custom plugin into the Power Apps? Version control for the custom plugin can be handled using the source control system like Git and it can be combined with the ALM, application lifecycle management. Plugins can be versioned and it can be deployed to different environments through the controlled release pipeline. How can plugin help in integrating the Power Apps with the IoT devices? So plugin can communicate with the IoT devices through the API and it collect the data from the sensors or sending the command to the devices. PowerApps can use these plugins to display the real-time sensor data or it also control the devices remotely. Can plugin extend the PowerApps to support multi-language or the localization features? Yes. Plugin can retrieve the localized content from a translation services or the database. So translation services are mainly used for the localized features. And it is based on the user language setting. PowerApps can call the plugin to display the content into the appropriate language. Can plugin be used to send a notification or alert from the PowerApps? Yes. Plugin can send a notification and as well as alerts by integrating with the emails, SMS or the push notification service. So when a specific event occurs into the PowerApps, the plugin triggers a notification based on the predefined business logic. How do you use plugins to integrate the PowerApps with the external CRM system? So plugins can be developed to communicate with the external CRM system through its API. And by this way, PowerApps can send the data to the plugins, which then creates or update the record into the CRM system. How can plugin improve the performance when handling the large data set into the PowerApps? This is a good question. So plugin can offload the complex data processing to an external server or the API. So instead of processing the large data set within the PowerApps, plugin handles the heavy lifting and returning only the necessary data that is required to display. Can plugin be used to implement AI or ML functionality within the PowerApps? Yes. Plugins can integrate with the AI or ML services like Azure Cognitive Service or a custom ML model API. So for this Power App, send the data to the plugin which processes it using the AI ML algorithm and it returns the predictions or the insight. How can plugin be used to manage the data across multiple systems in the Power Apps? So for this case, plugin can coordinate the data synchronization across multiple systems by calling their API, and it also manages the data consistency as well as ensure the Power App reflect the most up-to-date information. Can plugin help in creating the complex workflow that involve the multiple steps across system? Yes. Plugin can integrate with the workflow engine or the Power Automate to create the multi-step workflow. So when any event is triggered in the Power Apps, the plugin initiates a sequence of action across the different system. How can plugin help in handling the API throttling or rate limiting issue in the Power Apps? So plugin can manage the API throttling by introducing the retry logic, queuing the request or managing the API limits. And this prevents the Power Apps from exceeding API rate limit by handling the request to the plugin efficiently. Can plugin be used to integrate the Power Apps with blockchain technology? Yes, plugin can connect the Power Apps to blockchain service by calling the API that interact with the blockchain network. And it will allow the Power Apps to read or write the data to a blockchain layer. How do you handle the error logging or monitoring for the plugin in the Power Apps? Plugin can implement the error logging by sending the logs to the external logging services like Azure Monitor or the application inside. And this will help in the tracking and the troubleshooting plugin issues outside of the Power Apps. Can plugin be used to integrate the Power Apps with the legacy databases? Yes, plugins can be created as interface with the legacy database through the middleware or the custom API that bridge the gap between the Power Apps and the older database system. How do you ensure the security when using the custom plugin into the Power Apps? So security for the plugins can be ensured by using the secure API, implementing the authentication and the authorization mechanism, and encrypting the data in the transit and following the best practices for the API security. For the authorization mechanism, we can use the OAuth or the API key. Can plugin extend the Power Apps to integrate with the social media platform? Yes, plugins can interact with the social media API to post update, retrieve the social media data, or display the user analytics directly within the Power Apps. How do you use plugin to handle the file upload and the storage outside the Power Apps? So plugin can interact with the cloud storage solutions like Azure Blob or the SharePoint, and it allows user to upload the files to the Power Apps that are stored externally. So thanks friend for watching this video, and I am hoping that you have enjoyed the video and you have get the so much knowledge about the JavaScript plugins and the Power Apps, how we can utilize that one, custom connectors, API, authentication mechanism. So don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for the more content like this. And I will appreciate the each and every one of our subscribers. So until next time, take care and goodbye.